Blaise Pascal was a theologian from many centuries ago, and he said that we are all born with a hole in our hearts that can only be filled by Jesus.
Okay.
And so before that hole is filled, that bucket is filled by Jesus, we fill it with all the idols of the world, because the heart is a factory of idols. And so the emptier bucket is, we need to empty those idols to put the right stuff in it.
Hey, housewives, come on in. You know the dirty dishes are still in the sink from yesterday and the laundry is still in the basket. Pop your AirPods in and make yourself at home here.
I'm Tracy.
I'm Tori.
And we are your Unlikely Housewives. Stepping out in faith and believing that God calls the unlikely, we are here to show you the appreciation and validation you deserve, lead you to authentic relationships, and release you of believing the cultural lies to restore your faith and wellness.
Pull up those high-waisted yoga pants, tighten your top knot, and reheat your coffee for the third time. Turn up the volume, and let's go. Hey, housewives.
Hey, welcome back.
Welcome back. We are so excited to be here. And this is one of our favorite topics. Favorite, or just the one that we just keep having to find out for ourselves? Is that?
Well, I think it's because, as you get older, things change. What you used to do doesn't work anymore. So
things
we have
break
to just
down. Is that what you're saying? We
maybe,
age?
maybe.
I don't know.
So we got to try new things to keep it alive and fresh and exciting.
Yes. So with that being said, we're going to have Tracy introduce our guest.
Okay. Today we have Coach JT Tapias. He is a nationally recognized speaker, nutrition sociologist, and a Christian counselor whose faith-based approach to wellness has been featured on CBS, Men's Health, and Muscle and Fitness. As the creator of the Empty Your Buckets nutrition plan, JT goes beyond diet advice to help people understand the deeper emotional and spiritual roots behind their relationship with food. After immigrating from Colombia, becoming a professional soccer player, and building a successful business, JT's life took a dramatic turn when personal struggles nearly cost him everything. A life-changing encounter with Jesus reshaped his identity and purpose, and for the past 20 years, he's been helping others experience true transformation through healing the heart, mind, and soul. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. That was a pretty complete bio. Thank you.
Well, we got to just get it all in there so then we can break it apart into bite-sized pieces.
I know. And that's a pretty full story. I mean, professional soccer player, immigrant. I mean, I think we touched all the topics on that one. So
That's right.
All right. So like we said, obviously, that's a lot to packed in just a couple of sentences, but that's exactly what we want you to do, is unpack that and tell us a little bit about how you got to the point that where you're a Christian counselor who's teaching wellness and nutrition.
Absolutely. Should we start from the beginning?
Please.
Okay. So as you mentioned, I was born in a place called Medellin, Colombia. Now, when people here in the States hear that, they think that's on the other side of the world. It's only 3 hours away from Miami. So it's really, really close. I came here when I was 1. I was born to 2 very interesting parents. My mother was a professional singer. She was signed to a record label, was doing great things with her career until she met my dad. My dad was a pharmaceutical sales rep without a license.
Oh, wow. Interesting is a good precursor to that. Like, yes, good choice of words. Okay, go on.
Yeah. So I grew up in a 3rd-generation mafia family in Colombia. My dad was abusive to my mother, physically, mentally. And she got to the point where she had it. He had put her through hell. I have an older sister. She's 6 years older. And one day she decided to just pick up and leave. She had to leave Colombia because my dad was a very powerful man there. And there was just no way she was going to get away from him living even in another city there. So we came to the States. I was 1. My sister was 6. Interesting way here. We took a plane from Medellin, Colombia into Bogota. Bogota is the capital of Colombia. From Bogota to Mexico City, from Mexico City to Yucatan. From Yucatan, we took a speedboat and we went through an area called Bimini's. And I'm not sure if you guys have heard of the Bermuda Triangle.
Mm-hmm.
And so lots of stories about the Bermuda Triangle. We were on our way. A guy, Captain Pepe, actually picked us up in a speedboat. We were making our way to Miami, and the skies were clear. Everything was perfect. And all of a sudden, the skies just shut down. I mean, it could as dark as it could get. Big storm came out of nowhere. The water was super turbulent. And the engine to the boat shut off completely. So for 3 hours, we were in the middle of the ocean, almost perished. My mother says she held on to me so tightly. She put her nails, basically dug into my skin. When we got back to Miami, I had to go to some kind of hospital because she had to hold on to me so tightly. But we got through that. Wow. What Pepe, the captain, said was that he had only seen that twice. Now, this man, that was his career, was to basically bring immigrants through the border, through from Bimini into Miami, into the Miami shores. Back then, the Coast Guard was probably one man strong. We're talking 1979. And so it was pretty easy. We just kind of docked in Miami and got off the ship, waved a couple of times, and we were in the promised land. So we came here, and we were very, very poor when we first moved here. We ended up in Jamaica, Queens, in a third floor apartment. I'll never forget our landlord. Her name was Barbara. She had a vacuum store downstairs. We would collect pennies in order to buy Lipton soups. And it was, there were tough times. My mother felt a pinch and she decided to go back to work. And so she was a professional singer back home. So she decided to look around, and the nightclubs were obviously looking for entertainers. So she went back into that environment. Interestingly enough, this is right around 1980. And this is a pretty dark era in American history. This is what they call the Colombian Bonanza, which we see in the documentaries, Cocaine Cowboys, things of that nature. A lot of these drug dealers, this is where they would congregate. And so, of course, my mom was there singing. She was young, beautiful woman from back home. And their way of helping her was bringing her into the business. So here she is running away from my dad, who's involved in all this crazy stuff, comes to America to escape that. And then once again, she's around all these guys. So they bring her into the business, and the way they introduced her to the business is we became what in Colombian slang is called a caleta, which is basically a house bank. So these underground organizations can't stash their money in legitimate banks, and so what they do is they find middle class neighborhoods where they install families like us, and at any given time we were storing away $2-3 million. It was a 3-bedroom apartment. And we lived in one of the bedrooms, and then the other 2 bedrooms were stacked with cash to the top. And so the joke now is when kids were playing with Legos, I was playing with stacks of money, and so we had, this guy.
In logs, we have oh my gosh. That's
they
amazing.
were in, the brown sandwich bags. So, so basically my mom's job was to cut those bags and then stash, the money into $1,000 stacks, and then just piled them up. And there was a man that would come, drop money off. Sometimes he would pick money up, and he just had these big duffel bags that he would, go back and forth. My mother did that for about 3 years, quote unquote. She did her job well. And so she went up that ladder. And, unfortunately for the next 12 years, she started running her own cruise in New York City. And, I say we lived in luxury, but in misery. Our homes were consistently getting raided by the DEA. I used to go to court with my mother in Foley Square, which is, I don't know if you've seen these movies where they show the big courtrooms in New York City. Well, that's called Foley Square. And it's, these big courtrooms. And I remember being a kid going there all the time. And so I grew up in a very dysfunctional home. And, at 1992, everything just came crashing down. The southern state of Manhattan indicted my mother for various charges. She was going to go away for 25 years. And so she was plugged into the bad guys and the good guys. So there were people inside that gave her kind of a heads up and said, hey, if you go to court, they're going to put you away for 25 years. And so she wrote a letter to the judge and said, look, I know what I've done is wrong. I'm not justifying it. I would stay and pay for what I've done, but I have 2 young kids and I'm not going to leave them in the system. And so I'm going to flee. So we went back to Colombia. Really difficult time in Colombian history as well. 1992, 93, the infamous Pablo Escobar was being, prosecuted by he declared war on Colombia, but there were 4 agencies that were after him. And so it was tough. Whereas, here in the US, it was the DEA, the police always knocking on our doors. When we went back to Colombia, it was the bad guys, the police, DEA, different paramilitary groups. We were part of that. Well, my mother was part of that organization. And so, even though she wanted to run away from all that, when you vow into those organizations, it's not like the Boys and Girl Scouts. You can't just quit, and so you're in for life. So we went back and, bombs are going off in Medellin. There was a 6:30 p.m. curfew. Everyone had to be inside. It was one of the most dangerous places in the world at the time.
How old
and
were
here
you?
I am, like this kid. I'm sorry?
How old were you at this time?
I was 12.
Okay.
I was 12. So, I'm this kid that grew up in New York City. Yeah.
I was just wondering, is there any, with your mom coming back, was there any retribution from like your dad's side of because he was so far into this also, and like you just left?
Unfortunately, my mother became more powerful than my father. And so he was hiding from her.
Okay.
My mom was never, I'm not justifying it. She was doing whatever she was doing, but she wasn't a violent person. She wasn't putting hits out on people. I mean, her organization was, but it wasn't directly going through her. And so we go back and all this craziness is happening in Medellin. There's drive-bys, bombs are going off, 6:30 p.m. curfews. And so it was the wild, wild west. So my mother decided, this is too dangerous. I'm going to send JT back to the States. And at the time, Italy was a safe haven for Colombian narcos. So they went to Italy, to a place called Udine in the north of Italy. And I was sent back to New York to stay with some friends that were supposed to stay with me. But lo and behold, these people were also in the business, and they were cowboys. They were crazy. These people were on the violent side of that business. And so I'm in this mega mansion in Astoria, Queens, and I am hearing things that I had never heard before. And I'm like, this is bad. I mean, just really, really bad. So I just grabbed my book bag and walked out. And ironically, I was at that point, I had just turned 14. And so ironically, at the age of 14, for 14 months, I was homeless in the streets of New York City, which was tragic. And at the same time, one of the biggest blessings ever. And so weird way to grow up. I was what, they would call a hybrid. So I wasn't always living on the streets. I stayed with people from time to time, but I didn't really have a place to live. And so I would have to bounce around, walk into Chinese restaurants, ask, if I could do anything around the restaurant so I could get a little box of rice just to get through the day. And so, I always say it was just a blessing that I was super talented at playing soccer. And so it got me in with one of the amateur teams. I was living, in Queens, which I don't know if you guys have ever been to New York City, but in that area, they play a lot of soccer. This is just it's a melting pot, very diverse, people from all over the world. And so, I always joke and say, if you throw a basketball anywhere in the world, they'll play soccer with it. So, so I happen to be pretty talented. And, one of the ways that I was able to survive was staying with teammates. My coaches knew what I had going on, and they would help throw a couple bucks here or there. But it was pretty tragic after a while of, kind of being out and about. One of my more functional family members, semi-functional, picked me up, and she happened to live right across the street from Flushing Meadows Park. Once again, another providential moment. Flushing Meadows Park is where they play some of the best amateur soccer I would say in the world, once again, because it's a melting pot. And so that exposed me to players from all over the world. The team I was playing in was a competitive team. We had a lot of pro guys on our team that had played pro before. And so we were in a tournament in upstate New York. And I was approached by a guy who said, hey, we've been watching you. We like what we see. We would like to take you to Spain to try out. I honestly, when this guy approached me, I thought, what is he trying to sell me? But it was real. He was a scout, got on a plane and went over to the north of Spain to a place called Zaragoza, right in between Madrid and Barcelona. And then I tried out, and first 7 minutes on the pitch, I was pulled aside and I signed my first contract on a napkin. And I thought I had arrived. I said, this is it. And, for the next couple of years, I spent, traveling the world, playing soccer, next to a lot of the guys that I would idolize on TV and we're now teammates. And it was amazing. I was in Spain for almost 3 years. Then I got my player passes. I had a free player pass. I couldn't play on my team because of you can only have so many foreigners at one point. So I was sent to Guadalajara, Mexico, and played there for 2.5 years. And then at the age of 24, tragically, my career ended. It wasn't necessarily what happens to most guys where they get injured or anything like that. I just saw I wasn't getting a lot of playing time. I saw time running by, I was almost 24 at that point. I didn't have an education, and I started to kind of scratch my head and go, I better do something with my life. And so I still had an opportunity to come back to the States. I did that. I ended up in Tampa, Florida, devastated. I was so depressed. My dream had ended. I thought I was going to make it big and do all these things. And here I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with the rest of my life. And so I had to reinvent myself for 9 months. Honestly, I didn't want to get out of bed. I was staying with my aunt. There were days where I was just, I wish I would have never just woken up. It was pretty depressing. I had been groomed to play soccer. I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. And so, at one point I was in Miami and there was a guy. I have a lot of elevator stories, by the way. For some reason, crazy things happen to me in elevators. And I got into this elevator. There was this guy who I would see all the time. And the guy was always high as a kite. Okay. But he always had a book in his hand. And so I'm like, how does he read? I don't do drugs. And he's like, always reading. Like, this doesn't make any sense.
See, so kids, even druggies read. I think that's the lesson we all need to learn. That yes, we should all be reading more books. There you go.
Exactly. So I said, "Hey man, what are you reading?" And he just looked at me and he was like your typical surfer guy, like stoner. And he's like, "Oh, this is going to change your life." And he was super nice. So this thick book, about 400 pages, he hands it to me. He's like, "Read it. You got to give it back to me next week." And so I'd never read a book in my life. And I read the first couple of pages. A kid that had, growing up, I had ADD, learning disabilities, and I have no idea how I devoured that book in a couple of days. And it just gave me hope. I didn't grow up in church. I was pretty much an empty vessel at that time. I mean, there was just nothing there. It was all soccer. And I absorbed all this personal development stuff. And I was like, wait a second, you're telling me I can actually do something with my life? And so at that point, I made it a point to succeed. And I just wanted to prove everyone wrong. And so I just went on this journey of personal development and devouring books and going to conferences. That book I read was Awaken the Giant Within by Tony Robbins. And so I became a Tony Cloney, which is what they call him. I would go to all his conferences and webinars, and I did everything. Bought all his expensive programs. I actually got so close to him. I became friends with his son, Jarek. And then I just started on this trajectory of, taking courses and getting certified. I went back to school and I became a counselor and I became NLP certified. And I was doing all these things to get on stage and actually, now that I know, become a false prophet. And the thing that I was going after, I was chasing all the shiny things. I grew up in a very materialistic home where I was told that if I had money, I had everything. What was said to me was, a man is whatever he has in his pocket. Imagine growing up with that kind of conditioning, and so,
dang.
Yeah. And so, I was really looking for, I was just looking for confidence in all the wrong places. And so I took inventory of my strengths and weaknesses. I realized, I've spent so much time with, around coaches and trainers and nutritionists. And I said, I could really combine this aspect of personal development with physical fitness, which, wasn't a thing back then. And I started my first gym. And I started my first gym in probably one of the most gym saturated areas in the world, 30 gyms in a 5-mile radius, tons of competition. And so I went after the thing that, till this day, I believe brings the biggest return on investment, which is nutrition. But because I've always had sort of ADD and learning disabilities, I have to learn things on my own. And so I wasn't happy with keto, Atkins, South Beach, macro counting, all the programs that were out there. And so I put together the thing that I thought would work the best and was simple. We came up with the Empty Your Bucket nutrition plan, and that just exploded. And we literally went from being a tiny little, personal training studio to a premium personal training studio with trainers. We were doing really, really well, training all the shakers and movers in Tampa. I was in Tampa, Florida at the time. And I was, at that point, I thought, okay, I've made it. I was 27, 28 years old, had rental properties, the cars I wanted, all these things, but I was empty. I was constantly crying and depressed, and I couldn't understand why, because I had been told, right, all my life that if I achieved these things, I'd be happy. And so I spiraled into the nightlife. I was dating someone back then, bad relationship. Her dad was a well-known physician in that area. And, that opened doors for me. And so I thought, hey, I have the world, in the palm of my hand. And I went out to party with all these very rich kids that had time and money. And got addicted, stealthily addicted to Adderall, vodka, and Red Bull. Bad combination. And so Monday through Friday, here I was preaching health and wellness, and I had this booming, business. And on the weekends, I was just wrecking my body. And I lived that life for a while until one day I woke up and my heart was skipping a beat, literally skipping a beat. But I've always said most men are hypochondriacs. And so, I thought to myself, you know what? It's fine. Or maybe I'm just dehydrated and I'll be fine. So I went into work, but I felt weird. And right around 11 o'clock that morning, I remember one of my physician clients came in and I said, Doc, can you take my pulse? I said, I don't feel right. So he takes my pulse and he goes, something's off. He goes, but you should probably go get checked out. So I went into a walk-in clinic and they hooked me up to an EKG, and the nurse practitioner ran in and said, you got to run to the hospital. And I said, what's going on? She said, you're having the beginning of a heart attack. And I said, what? That's what's scary about heart attacks. I didn't feel that way. I mean, I've had worse stomach aches than how I felt at that point. And so I'm like, no way. I'm like,
I don't suggest medical advice. If you're about to have a heart attack, go run to the hospital.
100%.
I would that's kind of like, you're going to make me panic. Like, I would calm that down. Like, my bedside manner might be like, hey, so your heart, we should get you to the hospital instead of like.
Oh no, she ran in with the EKG. She said to me, I'm not playing around. Look at this. And there were points where I was flatlining, and she said, you have what's commonly known as holiday heart or an atrial fibrillation. And it's an electrical problem in the heart. You got to go to the hospital now. So I'm like, so at this point, finances are going great. Physically, that was my idol at the time. And so now my idol is being, someone shook my idol, which was my physical body. And I run to the hospital, to Tampa General, the best emergency room in America. That's what they call themselves. And they hook me up to all these machines. I don't know if you guys have seen the movie Hangover, but I don't know if there's a scene of the Asian guy that comes out of the trunk. So this Asian doctor, just like that guy, walks through the door. And I'm hooked up to all these machines. And I look over and I start laughing. And I'm like, and he's like, it's not a joke. He goes, and I go, no. And he says, you have an electrical problem in your heart. He says, have you been doing drugs? And I said, Doc, it's Wednesday, as if this for me was, a weekend thing. Right. And so he says, you can't drink again. He says, you have atrial fibrillation and a flutter. It's an electrical problem in your heart. And if you continue this lifestyle, he says, you're going to be gone very quickly. You're going to die. And it shook me. And I was very stoic at the time. And so, I remember walking out of that hospital and I was like, all right, my life is going to change. And this is kind of the wake up call I needed. And that's it. I'm leaving that life behind. But, at the time, well, now I know that, the flesh can't tame the flesh. I tried to use that discipline and that self-control to apply, living differently. But 2 weeks later, I was off doing the same thing. And even worse, I was depressed. I had a lot of stuff going on at the time. That girl that I was dating, we had dated for 5 years. She got up one day, left, and was dating another guy 3 weeks later. She was in St. John's having the time of her life. And here I was having all these issues. And so I was pretty down and out, and I went back to the party scene. And I remember one Sunday morning I woke up and I was done. I was absolutely done. I was hungover physically, mentally, spiritually. And I started to write this letter to my sister telling her that I was going to check out. And I remember as I'm writing this letter, my training kicks in and I go, whoa, like I'm in a really, really bad place. I need to call someone. And so there was a guy in the elevator that I would bump into every Saturday. And interestingly enough, I would only see this guy on Saturdays. I never saw him throughout the week. I literally would get in the elevator on Saturdays to go out to get faded into the night. And he was coming back from church with a Bible under his arm, right? Good looking dude, beautiful wife, right around my age. And I was just shocked. I was like, what is he doing? He's missing out. But he always struck me as a super positive, genuine guy. There was just something about him that, it was just undeniable, right? Super nice. And we had interacted a couple of times. He invited me to church. I invited him to the club. He's like, nah, I left that life behind a long time ago. He used to be a club promoter. And so he came to Jesus and he left everything behind and his life had radically changed. And, typical heathen response. I'm like, oh, I can't go to church. The walls will cave in, But, he was always super nice. So that Sunday morning, I'm like, who do I call? Who do I call? I'm like, let me call the elevator guy. So I call him up and I said, his name is Alex. I said, Alex, man, I don't know if you could do anything for me, but I don't think I have another day in me. And he says, what do you mean? I said, I'm going to take myself out. He said, whoa, 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 whoa. He said, those are big words. He says, don't do anything silly. I'm coming down right now. He lived above from me, came in, Bible in hand, sits across from me and looks at me and he's all excited. And he's like, let me tell you what God's doing in my life. And I'm like, I'm like, you're going to have to give me something else because I don't believe in God. And he got super serious. He looks at me as if he were, describing, oxygen with that kind of certainty. And he goes, oh, God is very real, regardless of what you think. He goes, and so is the devil. And he says, and the devil has an agenda, and that agenda is playing out in your life. And I'm like, okay. He says, the devil comes to steal, kill, and destroy. He says, but Jesus has come to bring life and life abundantly. To which I'm like, oh, okay, what do I do with that? And he said, well, what are you doing tonight? So I was going to kill myself, but if you have better plans, we could go do that, right?
Clearly, up one more day. Oh my gosh,
he's got an idea,
right?
Yeah.
So, but I was very serious. I was done. I was absolutely done. I had built things, and and then all these great things, and then they would just collapse, and I was absolutely done. So, I reluctantly got in his car. We went to this church. I had never been to an evangelical church before. I sort of being, South American, I have, most South Americans are Catholic. And so I kind of had a little bit of understanding of the Catholic Church. But I show up to this building and it's this beautiful modern building. And I see two things I love, Starbucks and beautiful women. And I'm like, yes, if this is Jesus, I am so in.
Yeah.
This is amazing. And they were giving the coffee away for free. I'm like, all right. So, we walk in and everyone's so friendly and the greeters are shaking my hand. I walk into the sanctuary and the pastor that day was speaking on the book of Job. And he starts, it was a topical message, but he did this kind of survey on the book of Job. And I'm listening to this and I look at my buddy and I go, did you tell this guy my story? Because everything sounded exactly like what I had going on, except that I wasn't a righteous man. I certainly wasn't seeking God. And he said, no, he says, that's how God speaks to us. He says, there's 800 people in here. This is a mega church in Tampa. And so I said, okay, service was over. I said, all right, that was great. Let's go. He says, let's go to the prayer team. So this church had kind of like people up front praying after service.
Yeah.
And I said, prayer team. Now, I grew up in an environment where, men don't cry. You're not supposed to express any kind of emotions. And you're certainly not supposed to tell your issues to anyone, especially men. And so we're walking in the direction of this guy that looks like a young Justin Bieber. And I'm like, he's super young. And I'm like, man, what is Justin Bieber going to do for me? But I get up there and he starts praying. He says, what are we praying for? And I just spill the beans and I tell him everything I have going on. He kind of gasped for air. This very innocent kid that looked like he had grown up in church. And I'm like telling him all these crazy things I'm doing. I said, I don't believe in God. I've been doing drugs and alcohol and, I was going to take myself out. He's like, whoa. He said, well, let's pray. So I closed my eyes and I am so embarrassed. The only thing I can think about is I really hope no one that knows me is watching me right now. That's all I can think about. Right. And I'm nervous and my palms are sweaty and he's doing his thing. I don't remember a word he said. I wasn't even focused on anything he was saying. All I know is that there was a moment in time where I sort of spaced out and I felt as if I had put my finger in an electrical socket. Now, I practice Orthodox Christianity, so I'm not very much on the touchy emotional side of things, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what I experienced that day has really challenged my theology ongoing because I felt something radically supernatural in that moment, and I started to bawl like a baby, which I'm not allowed to do as my background. That's a
big
no-no,
tough guy.
Right?
You're not supposed to. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. So I cried like a baby. I mean, I couldn't stop crying. And so I thanked the Justin Bieber guy. I walk away. I think I was the last one to leave that church that day. And as I'm walking out, this older man, probably in his late 60s, with this sort of fatherly figure, not his body, but, just like his demeanor. He comes up to me. He says, son, why are you crying? And that's that. I mean, that was kind of the icing on the cake. No one had ever called me son with that kind of affection. And I was just a mess. And I'm like, what is going on right now? And I said, I don't know why I'm crying. And he says, oh, I know. He says, and I have something for you. So he went to the back and he got me a New Believer's Bible. I said, I've tried to read this before and I don't understand it. He says, I think you're going to understand it now. I said, well, where do I start? And he says, you want to start in the Gospel of John? I said, where's that? So he went to the Gospel of John. He separated the page for me. I gave him a hug, thanked him, walked out of that church. And I remember waking up the next day and looking in the mirror and feeling like a 3,000-pound gorilla had fallen off my shoulders. I could breathe again. And it was, for the very first time, I looked at myself in the mirror and I didn't see that shame that characterized me looking at myself in the mirror. And slowly but surely, I don't have anything against 12-step AA or any of those programs. I think those programs are great and they've helped many, many people. I didn't need that. The Lord just uprooted me from the world. My recovery started. I walked away from all the vices. I walked away from dating, everything. I just locked myself. By the way, I went back to my business, which at the time, was a 7-figure business. Things were going well. We were scaling. And I said to my business partner, I said, I'm leaving. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, I'm done. I said, I'm selling my part. He says, are you crazy? Look at what we've built here. This is we're just getting started. And I said, no. I said, I don't know what happened to me the other day, but I need to go figure it out. And I can't be here. And my whole idea was people come here to get abs, but not Jesus. And, I want to be able to provide that same freedom that I'm experiencing now for others. However I can do that. I know I just can't do it here at the gym. So I sold my gym. I gave my gym away pretty much. 7-figure business. I sold for $25,000. I walked out with a book bag and just walked out, went into my condo, locked myself up for 2 years. All I did in those 2 years, I was living off my savings. So I would get up, I would pray, fast, read my Bible. Some of the people that were sort of mentoring me at the time, discipling me, were telling me that, you need faith in order to please God. But my brain was also going nuts and I needed rational answers. And so I wanted to know, first and foremost, was Jesus a historical figure? So that was the first thing. I wanted to understand that. So I devoured, Josephus, the Jewish historian. I went back and read his writings, and then I wanted to understand why the Bible was utilized, why they utilized all of these agrarian terms and what did they mean. I got into it, and because that's how I am. When I was in the party scene, I was all in, and when I was out, so I'm one of those guys, right? All in or all out.
Yep.
And, it was really my desert time. Now I understand that the Lord was removing influence and all the things that I had placed my confidence in to build dependence on him. And so it was those 2 years of him just building me up. And I started to pray. I said, Lord, I know I've never wanted a wife. I used to joke with my married friends and think who does that? Who gets married and has kids? That's crazy. And you push a stroller around. Are you crazy? You're responsible for these little people for 21 years. Who does that? I want to travel and make money. That's all I want to do. Right. But little by little, the Lord just took that heart of stone and started making into a heart of flesh. And I started to really, really want to get married and have kids. It was weird. I would now look at kids and I was a weird guy at Starbucks looking at kids going, oh, and
weird guy at the playground.
Yeah. And the creepy guy. I was almost creepy. I would see little kids and be like, oh, what's her name?
Yeah.
And so here's the funny story, full circle. At this point, I'm like, okay, this Tony Robbins stuff, this is out the door. I know something more powerful now than this. And I threw away all my personal development books. I threw over 700 books in personal development away because I'm like, I just need one book and it's the Bible. Right.
Yeah.
But because I was a Tony Cloney for so long and I had literally, evangelized all of my friends, there was one particular friend, Scott, who I had talked to him about Tony Robbins many times before. He calls me one day and he's like, hey, Tony Robbins is going to be in Orlando. We should go. I said, dude, I'm not there anymore. You should come to church. He's like, no. I already bought my ticket and I bought you a ticket. I'm like, no, this is $1,000 ticket.
Yeah. I was going to say that's not a cheap ticket.
I'm like, oh, okay. I said, okay, I'll go with you. But listen, there's just something better. He's like, all right, just come with me. You can tell me about it while we're there. So we're sitting at the Gaylord Palms and we're watching Tony Robbins. And all of a sudden I'm there. I'm just focused. I'm listening. And I look to the left and I see, you know, I don't know if you've ever been to one of these conferences, but there's about 3,000 people in that auditorium. Okay. And the introverts are being extroverts. And it's just this collective euphoria that happens in these places. People are jumping up and down and they're excited about nothing.
We've been to something similar. That's not, but yes, but it's a very,
it's an energy.
It's an energy. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Right.
It's a very specific energy.
So even when I was crazy, I never liked the crazy ones. Like that was never me. Like I always liked the girl next door, right? The very calm, nice girl. And I look over and I see this young lady sitting there and she's super well put together and serious. And I'm like, everyone's going crazy and she's not even moved by this stuff. So it caught my attention and she was really pretty. So I kept looking and she passed by and I heard, she said something to her coworker and she spoke in Spanish. And I recognized her accent being from my city. And I'm like, this is an amazing icebreaker. Right. And so, and one of the breaks, I went up to her and I introduced myself and the girl stood me up like 3 times to talk over the phone. But on the 4th time, we finally spoke. We spoke for 3 hours. She was living in Miami at the time. I was living in Tampa. I'm walking you through this really, really quickly. One weekend, I went out there. We spoke. On the 2nd day, I told her I was going to marry her. She said I was crazy. She wasn't a believer, but she was very receptive to everything I was saying. And she was a good girl. And I'm like, okay, there's something good here, right? Like, I'm not just going to throw this away. And she told me if I wanted to marry her, I was going to have to wait 3 years. She really needed to know me and yada, yada. We dated for 3 months, got married on month 4. We've been married for 13 years. We have 2 beautiful little girls, a 6-year-old, a 10-year-old. And, you know, this is just kind of the cryptic version of the story, a very short version of the story. But in essence, you know, I believe that the Lord brought me through all of these situations of dysfunction, addiction, despair, being homeless, and taking all that stuff and bottling it into what I do today. So we have a multidisciplinary approach to nutrition that includes all of those aspects, the personal development aspect of things, the counseling aspect of things. Obviously, theology is first and foremost with what we do. And it's just been really, really cool.
That is quite a story. I don't know that I have met anyone that has had that kind of a story, though.
I would like to offer to buy the rights to the movie of this. Before Netflix gives you a call, please, because this is, I mean, and isn't that the real fun part? Mm-hmm. Is that God is so cool. You couldn't make this stuff up. I mean, there is the way that he just utilizes every moment and uses, and my favorite verse, Romans 8:28, uses all things for the good of those who are called according to his purpose. And I just, that's insane. I don't know where to start. Like,
it really is amazing. So there's so many pieces about it. And I think my favorite part is that he used what you began to change your life with to connect. That's where you found your wife, to bring it all back together. Like there was purpose in that. And now you were, you know, having this family, living with purpose for him in your life. So tell us, obviously you're doing this. Is it just online or do you have a gym still?
Yeah. So we opened up. So part of that story, when I was in those 2 years of desert time, I was praying and I was praying for a wife. So the wife was there. We connected. We dated for 3 months, got married on month 4. She was an executive in Miami. She was doing quite well for herself, but you know, I wasn't going to move to Miami. I said, Miami's a crazy place. I want to make sure we're at a place where we can have our kids and, you know, our kids grow up in a decent place where things aren't crazy. And so anyway, she moves to Tampa. I'm still living on savings, but I'm not working at this point. You know, I've left everything for 2 years. I took a 2-year sabbatical. So I start praying. I go, Lord, I need to be a provider, right? And so what is it that you have for me? You know, and then that process of praying, the Lord, not audibly, but just in my heart, just impressed upon my heart this idea of going back into the fitness industry, but this time with a different vision and mission. And, you know, the word that I kept hearing in my heart was that we were called to be a lighthouse for him in that area. And so went back into the gym business. I had no idea. I was just being obedient. I had no idea how we were going to bring Jesus to such a superficial sort of vain thing like fitness, right? And especially in the area where we were, this is a very affluent area in South Tampa. And, we're surrounded by $10-15 million homes, the cars and the lifestyle and the food. And so we went right into the heart of it in Soho. We started a gym called Fit Method 413 based on Philippians 4:13. And I just started to pray and ask the Lord to show us how we were going to do it. Interestingly enough, he sent all the right trainers and people that were more mature in their faith. He sent this one guy, Bill Sugg, was a 21st century John the Baptist. The guy was just on fire for the Lord. We opened early because our first class would start at 5 a.m. His saying was caffeine and Jesus, baby. Like he was just walking and he was just crazy, right? So, a couple months after opening, our running joke was that we would lead more people to the Lord doing squats and lunges than most churches any Sunday. And it was just an amazing, power church ministry. We saw people come through those doors with addictions, hooked on alcohol, about to get divorced. And we saw restoration and people reconciling to the Lord. And we had relationships with all the local churches. So we were having these conversations during the week and then sort of bringing people into all these different churches. We had a homeless ministry in the area. Obviously, that's close to my heart. And man, we just really impacted that city for Jesus. And I married every single one of my coaches. Can you believe that? I got to marry all of my coaches. So the joke is, if you go to work for JT and you're single, he's going to marry you. And sure enough,
funny.
Yeah,
that is really cool.
Okay, where's the dotted line? I'll sign up. I want you to bring one of these to Southern Johnson County.
Honestly, I was like, is this a franchise? Have you done that yet? Like, how is this not like?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, obviously, it's an online.
He said he's never been to Kansas. I'm just saying, come on out, JT. We got, because you're talking the affluent lifestyle, the $1 million homes around us, and people who are literally addicted to everything except Jesus. It's literally, that just speaks to my heart. I'm like, oh yeah, we'll do this.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right. It's superficial.
It is.
Yeah,
it is. But what's interesting is, and this is something that I tell Christians today, Jesus doesn't need our help. Okay. Let's start from there. Right. Jesus doesn't need our help, but I think we just oftentimes we have this desire and the zeal to see people come to Jesus. And so we just rush into these conversations and we just we put our foot in our mouth oftentimes, right? And people push back when we're Bible thumping and doing all these things. One of the things that I believe still to this day, we sold the gyms 5 years ago. We moved to South Florida. We're strictly online now. We are talking about eventually opening up a storefront for that specific reason, what we call relational discipleship, walking with people.
Yeah.
So what's really interesting is the vast majority of conversations that I had at Fit Method were people that were resistant to the gospel. They're like, look, don't give me that story. I'm not drinking the Kool-Aid. I like who you are though, JT. You're a cool guy. Like, you show up, you're on time, you do what you say you're going to do. And that's all that matters. And so that gets the foot in the door because people start to think, okay, this guy's not weird. This guy's just a normal guy. He's a family guy. He's all about the family. He's all about work. He has a strong work ethic. And they see that congruency in your life. And then it gives you room. And when I say that gently, I don't have it all together. I'm a fallen man, like we all are. Like, we all fall short of the glory of God. But they would see the difference. And then it would just give you room they would open up and start sharing, their aches and pains. And man, did they have aches and pains and things going on in their life, right? And my marriage, and I'm about to get a divorce. And then, we would take them to Starbucks, sit in front of them, have a normal conversation, and then just say, at the end of the conversation, just listen and care, like genuinely care for these people. And then say, dude, listen, I know you don't believe in Jesus, but can I pray for you? And they're like, sure. And that would open up so many doors with those people. And all of a sudden you'd see their hearts start to soften. Like, where do you go to church again? Oh, we go over here. Can I join you on Sunday? Absolutely. And then it was just one relationship after the next. It wasn't the masses. Like, we weren't like in the book of Acts hitting 3,000 people at a time, but it was just one person at a time. And we were so impactful relationally,
I would just say it goes back to how you were impacted by Alex, I believe his name was, in the elevator.
Yeah.
It was every Saturday you saw him with his Bible coming home, and you were going out to the club, and he was going home with his wife.
Yep.
That's
and
right.
he was the person that you thought to call. Like, and he didn't force you to, I mean, he just brought his Bible and was like, let me tell you a story. And he started where you were at.
Yeah.
And that was, and that's what you guys have clearly done for every other individual when you at the gym too. So
that's right. He was just a normal guy. He was just caring, and that's it. I think oftentimes what I see is, and maybe I'm just speaking for myself because, as I said, I'm all in or all out. One of my strongholds was legalism. And when I came to Christianity, I was, a caged legalist for a very long time where I was, Bible thumping people. And then I just realized this is going nowhere. This is not how I was reached. Right. And so our approach is everything. And we just have to be genuine. We have to scan the room. We have to look and see who's in need. I teach my daughters that now. We go to Starbucks and I'm like, don't just be in your drink or in your device. Look around, see who's crying, see who's down. Ask people, if you could pray for them. And I mean, some incredible opportunities have really opened up. And I love that about just being able to walk with people, because that's ultimately what's required before we even give them the good news, Yeah,
absolutely.
I know we're going to have to wrap up soon, but I do just want to touch on because we talked about it before we hit record, but the obsession with personal development of, Tony Cloney, like you were saying, is that right? Like people will spend all the money on personal development. Yes. And obviously nothing personal against him or any of these other people. They are sharing what they know and what has worked for them and is clearly working for others. But there's still that section where it leaves you empty. And sometimes it's not more personal development is not the answer, or business development is not the answer. It's, leaning into Jesus and going, well, Jesus, hold on, where do you want me? Because like you said, I only needed one book, the Bible. Like all the other stuff, it all comes from the Bible.
That's right.
I mean,
yeah.
So
in that area, that whole area of personal development. So Christians, we're really good at theory. We're just not very good at the practical side of things.
Yes.
New Age and which is humanism. It stems from humanism.
Yeah.
Meaning, if you give me enough time and you have enough money, you can make anything happen. This is what humanists believe, right? You can make anything happen with your mind. They're really good at the practical side of things. Pragmatics is huge inside of personal development. And that's why oftentimes people are more interested in personal development than they are in Christianity. Biblical Christianity, though, has 3 principles, which is the thought process, the emotion process, and the action process. That's biblical Christianity. Okay. In seminary terms, it's called orthodoxy, which is, the word ortho means the correct way, right? So this is where we get the word orthopedic from, the straight way, the right way. So we need the correct orthodoxy. But then we need the correct orthopathy, which is the right emotion, which stems from the right orthodoxy, the right thought, the right theology, right?
Yep.
And then we need the right orthopraxy, which means the practice, the right practice. So we are thinking human beings. We think, we feel, and we act. What personal development has in terms of markability is the practical side of it, because they give you behavior modifications, which aren't the end all do all. They're needed, but they're not the end all do all. Mm-hmm. So if I tell you, or Tracy, if you do A, B, and C, you'll get D. You're like, cool, let me go do that. And if you do that, you'll get the thing you want, A, B, and C. The problem is you can't sustain it, because in order to sustain that, right, you need the intrinsic aspect of it, which only comes through the Spirit.
Mm-hmm.
So when we can join all 3 of these, it becomes very, very powerful. So a lot of those behavior modifications that I learned in the personal development world, I haven't tossed out completely, because Paul even says it, right? Take the good and leave the bad, right?
Right.
So, So I've used a lot of those behavior modifications, but I understand that they're just sort of an auxiliary to my faith, right? So I need to be able to take my spiritual disciplines and tangibly apply them from a behavior modification standpoint. We can have a whole different call around this because this is a really interesting subject.
Yeah,
but the
and I think this is going to be a part 2 in the fall.
I'll leave it at that. But yeah.
But that's because too, people forget so often, I think, is that Jesus says they will know you by the fruits.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And we forget that because it's not just a like, okay, well, I just get to show up and go to church and feel, and my relationship with Jesus is a personal one. It better not be, because that's not, then nobody knows have a personal relationship with Jesus. And then when you get to heaven, he'll be like, get away from me. I don't know you. I didn't have a relationship with you. Was that Matthew 22, I think? But that's where I think Christians get I can do the thought and the feeling all the time, but it's the practical steps of like, what does the fruit look like? Because it's not, people don't want to get into the depth of it, I guess. But yes,
there's a lot of virtue signaling in Christianity, and oftentimes what happens is, you see these people that can recite scripture, but at the end of the day, it's like, show me your fruits, right? And so I'm already teaching my 6 and 10-year-old, hey, the best sermon is a life well lived, right? Yeah. And so you can talk all you want, but at the end of the day, fruits speak louder than anything else, right? Yeah. And so, and it's not just the focus on doing, because you also need the faith aspect of it, but they go hand in hand. James tells us that in the book of James, right? Works and faith go hand in hand.
Yeah.
And so that's the focus. I often see a lot of non-believers showing more fruit than believers.
Yes.
And it pains me because I know that we have the truth. I know that, we can be so impactful to our families or communities, but we just have to wake up and really start saying, okay, this is my faith and how do I apply this? Right. And so this is how we break things down into habits. Yeah. And so inside of our program, we teach people how to become disciplined, and discipline is such a big word, right? Because you think, it's a pre-genetic disposition. Some people have it, some people don't. That's the biggest lie ever. Everyone can be disciplined. It just takes a set of behaviors that we need to incorporate on a daily basis. And those are the people that we look from afar and go, oh, look at that person, how disciplined is. That is just someone who's showing up to those particular behaviors consistently. And we call those people disciplined.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we break that down from a nutrition perspective, but then because we have a multidisciplinary approach and we understand that even if you get super fit, but your spirit isn't fit, then we're doing nothing. So we approach all that. I'm actually getting ready here at 1:00 to go into our Tuesday prayer meeting with all of the people that are on our online program. Wednesdays, we have our Temple Stewardship Bible study where we touch on the theology. Like, how do we practically apply this to our lives? How do we pray? How do we enrich devotional life? How do we read our Bibles? How do we apply that? And so we're not just talking nutrition, we're talking theology at the same time. And we're getting fit mentally, physically, and spiritually. So
I love that. That is so amazing. So give us just a final snippet of your empty your bucket plan, because I can assume based on the title that we're like we're getting rid of the things that don't serve us. Yeah. Is that about right?
Yeah. So some of you guys are maybe familiar with Blaise Pascal. So Blaise Pascal was a theologian from many centuries ago, and he said that we are all born with a hole in our hearts that can only be filled by Jesus.
Okay.
And so before that hole is filled, that bucket is filled by Jesus, we fill it with all the idols of the world, because the heart is a factory of idols. And so the emptier bucket is, we need to empty those idols to put the right stuff in it. So in our process, we have a 3-step process: reset, reboot, and excel. We obviously start with the nutrition aspect of things because that's why people come to us. So we give you the goods, but then, the intrinsic aspect of it is also there. So what we start to identify, especially amongst Christians, is that food is an idol, right? We call it, food is the Christian crack. We leave the world, we leave all the vices of the world, everything gets baptized except your plate. It shouldn't be that way, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we are called to live as a living sacrifice to the Lord. Paul wasn't talking about a 6-pack, but he was talking about stewardship. And this is an area where most churches kind of it goes right over their head, because I've been a Christian now for a little while. I've yet to hear a sermon on gluttony, right? And no one touches on it.
It's not popular. Nobody wants to hear it.
No one wants to hear it, and everyone struggles with it, right?
Yes, and they want to walk out of church happy with a TED Talk.
Yeah. But we're called to surrender those things. If I'm mitigating emotions through food, where I should be praying, that's called an idol. And so when we tactfully and lovingly show people that, if your desire is to genuinely serve the Lord, then you start to rid yourself of those things, and then that has the byproduct of that is a slim waistline. So
where can people find you?
Yeah, CoachJTTapias.com is my main hub, CoachJTTapias.com. And I'm all over the internet on Instagram, Coach JT Tapias, on YouTube. We have over 800 videos on YouTube now.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. Okay.
So
Well, we will have all those links in the show notes for all of our listeners. And we just want to say thank you so much. And I just want to say thank you for being obedient in what God has called you to do. And just because that's extremely difficult. And in a world where it is what's in your pocket, you went the complete opposite way just out of sheer obedience in that when he called you. And so I just want to say thank you for that, because that is a sacrifice. So we will have all the links in our show notes. And then I guess until next time, housewives, bye.
Whether we made you laugh or cry today, we pray you feel appreciated, bolder and braver than yesterday, stronger and more faithful for tomorrow, and living in who you were made to be today.
Join our online community on Facebook, link in the show notes. And be sure to review and subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you enjoy listening. Until next time, housewives, we give you permission to walk confidently, free, and to be intentional in your slippers or stilettos.